Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dick Stevens speaking. This afternoon, we are extremely fortunate in having with us in our studio here at WCAL Monsieur Marcel Dupré, world-known organist at Saint-Sulpice in Paris, head of the organ department of the National Conservatory in Paris, and general director of the American Conservatory at Fontainebleau. Monsieur Dupré presented a concert at Carleton College on November 10th and has kindly consented to come to our studios for an interview this afternoon. Monsieur Dupré, I'd like to begin by asking you, where were you born?
I am born in Rouen, Normandy, from a family of organists. My father was the organist of Saint-Ouen Cathedral in Paris till his death. My grandfathers both were also organists in the city. Then I am from a family of musicians and mostly a family of organists.
Well, it's easy to understand then where you acquired your interest and skill in the organ. Who was your first teacher, Monsieur Dupré?
My first teacher was my father, who was himself a pupil of Guillemot.
Where did you do your first studying? That is, after you had studied with your father, who was your next teacher?
I studied at my home in Rouen, and when I had my church, I was 12 in Rouen, in Saint-Vivien. At this time, I started to be a private pupil of Guillemot, and my father took me to take a lesson with Guillemot, who has been my teacher for 10 years.
You were organist then in a church in Rouen at the age of 12?
Yes.
That's very interesting. Now, I understand that your first composed work was at the age of 15.
My first important work, yes, but I tried to compose as a little child. I have kept some manuscript of the age of 7 and a half, short and tiny the thing. But at the age of 14, I was crazy about the episode in the Bible, of the scale of Jacob, and my father made a text in versification, French, for me, and I made on that a short oratorio which takes about 45 minutes long, or something like that.
And that was performed in Rouen?
Yes.
Well, now, after you studied with Monsieur Guillemot, who was your next teacher?
First of all, I have studied in the Conservatory of Paris piano with Diemer. I got my first prize of piano in 1905. Then, after this long preparation with Guillemot, he took me in my class, and I got my first prize of organ to the first competition in 1907. Then, by the way, I was appointed assistant of the organist of Vidor in Saint-Sulpice in 1906. He took me in his class. I got the first prize of fugue in 1909, and then the competition for the Prix de Rome I went in 1914.
Now, I'm sure that many of our listeners, Monsieur Dupré, have heard of the Prix de Rome, and I think that many of them perhaps are unfamiliar with the method in which the prize is awarded and perhaps the history of the prize. I wonder if you could tell us a little about that.
Yes. The Prix de Rome is a very curious and interesting French institution. It was an idea of Napoleon III. Everyone knows that the Literary Academy of French has been formed centuries before by Cardinal of Richelieu, who was minister of Louis XIII. Then Napoleon added to that academy of 40 members 4 other academies, for political science, for science, physics science, for arts, and for archaeology. Then the Academy of Fine Arts, who is also of 40 members, give every year a prize on painting, on sculpting, on architecture, and on music. Of this prize go and spend 4 years in the Villa Medicis in Rome, in which he has all his expense paid, and he can spend 4 years dreaming, composing, working, and taking advantage of all the marvelous things he can see in Italy, in Rome. You see, that is the institution of the Prix of Rome. The competition itself, it's organized that way. First of all, is a first competition to which everyone who is to take part, if he is less than 30 years old and French or naturalized. Then, among these chaps, after that first competition, who take about 1 week, 6 of them, the best, are chosen for the final competition. And this final competition is done extremely seriously. They must not have the help of anyone, and they are locked in one of the big chateaux of France. They are treated in same time like little prince, but like prisoners, because every letter they receive is read by the administration to be sure any information is given on the competition, and they can leave. Of course, they can leave the chateau, but if they leave, they are obliged to give up the competition, you see. And for 30 days, they, for the music, they have to compose a cantata, which is, imagine an act of theater with 3 persons, and the orchestra score, which take at least 150 pages. And 30 days to compose and score such a piece is, as you see, a hard work. And only these who has a real technique of compositor can afford to take that concourse.
Well, that was very interesting, Monsieur Dupré. I wonder if you might mention some of the outstanding people in earlier history in France who have been winners of the Grand Prix.
Bizet, Carmen, Gounod, Massenet, Debussy. These 4 are among the more celebrated for the French composer.
Well, that's extremely interesting, and I'm sure that our listeners now better understand the awarding of the Grand Prix de Rome. Well, now, Monsieur Dupré, I wonder if you would tell us something about your positions as organist in some of the various churches in France. Your first one you mentioned was in Rouen and Saint-Vivien, and then you were assistant organist at Saint-Supplice.
Yes.
And then after that?
And I kept with Vidor, his assistant, for 27 years. During that time, during the other war, the First War, I took the position of Notre Dame, from which the organist, Vian, was very sick. He was almost blind and had to spend 5 years in Switzerland to support treatment on his eyes. Then during this time, I was the same. I was with Vidor. And if Vidor need me in Saint-Sulpice, I had one of my friends who I could send in Notre Dame. This in 1935. That means that it's already 13 years I am in Saint-Sulpice.
I see.
And 13 years I am in Saint-Sulpice.
I see.
And previously assistant during 27 years.
And then at Notre Dame for 5 years.
Yes.
How about your concert tours? I know that you have toured rather extensively. I wonder if you would tell us something of your travels.
Yes, that is now my 10th tour in America. I toured for the first time in 1921 in America. I came in exclusivity for the Wanamaker of Philadelphia and played 6 recitals in the big Philadelphia organ and 12 in New York. The following year, I took my first tour. I kept here very long for 6 months. I gave 94 concerts. Following year, I came. I was still longer. I gave 110 recitals. I was exhausted at the end, but extremely pleased and extremely interested in the country.
What about your tours of Europe, Monsieur Dupré? What countries have you appeared in?
I have played in mostly the country in Europe, and also I took in 39 a very interesting tour in Australia.
In Australia?
You see, but an organist can only in country which has organ.
Truly.
You see, and all the organ, by example, all Orthodox church in which they don't know organ, they have only singing in church, or this country are practically close to us.
One question that I would like to ask Monsieur Dupré, what did you do during the occupation of France?
During the occupation of France, I did not move from my place. And I did not miss one single Sunday to play in Saint-Sulpice. I did not miss one single class in my Conservatory of Paris, except if they were bombing, we had all to go in the basement of the building.
I see. Now, I wonder if you would tell us briefly, as in your position as instructor, head of the organ department, I should say, at the Paris Conservatory, is it difficult for students?
It is a very special organization because for the competition for the first prize, they are obliged to have a very important part, several proofs on improvisation. They must improvise first a figured choral, and then a fugue, a severe fugue, scholastical fugue on a subject imposed, and a movement of a symphony. After that, they have to play by memory a great piece of the repertory, maybe by César Franck or other composer. Then, you understand, it's not possible to master the improvisation if you don't master first composition. Then I can only accept in my class in the conservatory people who have finished their study in harmony, contrepoint, fugue, musical form, and scoring.
I understand. It's very difficult then to stay qualified in order to study
Oh, yes.
in the conservatory.
To give you an idea, the limit of entrance in my class is 28 years old.
28 years old.
They can keep 5 years in my class. That means like I can have under me pupils who are 33 years old, which for a student is very old age, and that represents the knowledge they must have and our difficulty in the competition.
You have, or have you had any students from America recently?
I had many private students from America. Since the end of the other world, I had a little more than 120 American students who came in my place to study privately with me.
And do you have private students now, Monsieur Dupré?
Now I am touring, you see, and I have been obliged to give up my private teaching 2 years ago because I was so busy teaching and was so busy in the conservatory, composing and touring. But occasionally, when I have a pupil, a young man or a young girl, specially gifted, in which I see a great future, I accept him.
I'd like to mention to our listeners at this time that one of the outstanding features of Monsieur Dupré's playing is the fact that he plays his works entirely from memory. And he's also a master of improvisation. In New York, in 1921, he improvised a complete symphony in 4 movements, which were based on themes suggested from the audience. And as one of the critics mentioned at that time, it was nothing short of a miracle. Monsieur Dupré, how can you account for this skill of yours in improvisation?
I had that, I should say, in my blood since a very young time. And I believe certainly in heredity. I told you in the beginning of this talking that I was from a family of organists. I stopped both my grandfather, from which I have very clear memory, and also my father, improvised. And as a little boy, it was...
Well,
see, that in a way it's rather natural in me.
It certainly is, Monsieur Dupré, as I'm sure all of the people who attended your concert last night will testify. Now, to get up to the present, where will you be going next in your tour?
I am just leaving and play tomorrow night in Winnipeg.
In Winnipeg, and then from
Canada.
there, where will you go?
From Winnipeg, I jump to Detroit, and I will go progressively south to Florida, and then west to California. From California, I will go again north to Seattle, and back to New York to the end of January. The tour this year is 74 recitals.
I see. And then at the end of that time, you will return to Paris?
Yes, I return and resume my duties in France.
Now, is Madame Dupré accompanying you on your
Yes, she always accompanies me in all my tours.
Well, now in closing, Monsieur Dupré, I wonder if you have advice perhaps for our American students who are interested in the organ.
Yes, I will advise them to work slowly, to control always with their eyes and the ears. If they do absolutely, exactly, absolutely, purely this, and they will get a result if they practice very slow and if they repeat every little passage till they get perfection for a few notes. They must take a bit to separate each bar and work separately each part of their pieces, slowly and then increasing the time. You must, to get perfection, you must first of all get perfection in a short passage. That is the root of all teaching for real virtuosity.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Dupré. We have been extremely fortunate this afternoon to have been able to talk with Monsieur Marcel Dupré, organist at Saint-Sulpice in Paris, head of the organ department of the National Conservatory in Paris, and general director of the American Conservatory at Fontainebleau, and presently on tour in America.